Today, Dr. Louise and I are going to talk about diet culture and fat phobia, how they are everywhere in our society and how it harms everyone, fat, thin, or somewhere in between. Fat phobia is so pervasive that I bought into it 100% without even realizing it. But once I learned about diet culture, things started to make sense. And like they say, there's no zealot like a convert, so hello. I come to you from the perspective, first, as a mother raising a daughter in this society, and secondarily, as a straight-sized white woman who has tried all the things in the pursuit of fitness. Apple cider vinegar shots every morning, Atkins, calorie counting, juice cleanses. I've even done the Whole30 3 times. And I know that's not really a diet, but it's a lifestyle change. But newsflash, lifestyle and wellness are the rebranding of diets. Now that it's commonly accepted that diets don't work. You just need to make some lifestyle changes, and then you'll be thin. My conversion started when I became a mother. My firstborn, Lily, was and is absolutely perfect. And yet, as she grew, I could see the ways that society would force her to change to fit in with this idealized portrait of girlhood and womanhood. As an aside, Michael is also absolutely perfect. However, I have no idea what society will do to him as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy. So that's another matter. But I want to protect Lily from feeling less than because she does not look like the people on the cover of magazines. So I talked to her about body image and the unrealistic pressure she will feel to look a certain way, hoping to protect her in the best way that I can. And yet now I know that body positivity is not going to fix it, because no matter how positively you feel about yourself, people will still treat you differently if they don't think you look the right way. And now I turn over to Dr. Louise.
It may surprise you to learn that I am fat. In fact, I'm what's called a super fat. See the cover of your order of service to learn more on the language that many fat folks use to self-describe. Like many fat folks, I am someone who uses the term fat as a descriptor, merely an adjective, similar to tall and short. The term fat has been used to cause harm to folks in larger bodies for a long time. And like many terms used to oppress, fat folks have begun to reclaim it. While it was once used to cause me harm, I now use the term in a way that strips it of that power. I don't hesitate to call myself fat any more than I would hesitate to call myself tall. And I'm perfectly okay with you using that language to describe me, although please note that not all fat folks are comfortable with the term. There is one word that is best avoided when it comes to describing folks with larger bodies, and that is obese. While you might think this term is a neutral medical word, it turns out that no one has ever used that term in a positive way. It is almost universally used to dehumanize fat folks. You may hear me or Megan use it today, typically only in the context of quotes, but that is because its use is so widespread. I would strongly encourage you to get that term out of your vocabulary as soon as possible. Fatness is a shared experience in my family, and dieting in an attempt to shrink our bodies is deeply embedded in our family culture. My aunt, who was slightly smaller than I am now, sought out gastric bypass surgery and became a motivational speaker for Weight Watchers. When I was 12 years old, I started to talk negatively about my own body. I eventually found a variety of different ways to shrink my body, including Weight Watchers, way too much DDR, which is a dancing-based video game, and seeking a revenge body to get back at a particularly cruel ex. Ultimately, none of these strategies worked. And now my body is 2 pant sizes larger than it would have been if I had never embarked on the journey of shrinking myself. Today, I am a fat activist. This means that I center my liberation work on supporting the fat folks who experience the most harm as a result of their body size. Infini-fats are folks who often get cruel remarks when they go out in public, do not have access to chairs and basic tools to accommodate them in public spaces. And often they cannot get access to medical care because doctors refuse to treat them. It is not until Infini-fats can comfortably and safely exist in our everyday society that the work of fat liberation is complete. Now, the point of our conversation today is not to tell you what you should do with your body. As a fat activist, I respect your bodily autonomy. You can do whatever it is you want with your body. However, the ways that we treat fat folks in our society is something that everyone needs to take time to understand. Not only may these cultural attitudes towards fatness influence your choices when it comes to your body, but most people are very likely to be contributing to the oppression of fat folks independently of their current body size. And since our second principle is justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, it is essential as Unitarian Universalists that we come to understand how we can mitigate these harms.
Hello again. I'm going to start off by pointing out my bibliography, and I didn't get this done in time to include in the order of service, so it's out where you can find the delicious snacks that I encourage you to indulge in without guilt after the service. I relied on a lot of sources in working on this because a lot of these ideas are not intuitive, and they go against the common wisdom and what we have been taught all our lives. But this information is important for me to share with you because of the harm that it causes and how these harmful ideas are preventing the world that my children are growing up in from being a safe, welcoming space for all people. Looking back, I have caused harm in my life because I was so steeped in diet culture. It was all well-intentioned, but harmful nonetheless. In one example, someone very close to me was going through a rough patch, unemployed during that time when there just were no jobs. And she was also gaining weight. So what do I bring up when we're together? Not, how is the job search going? Not, what are you doing to keep yourself sane right now? Instead, I ask, do you realize that you are gaining weight, and what are you going to do about it? That was the wrong thing to say. It did not help, and it caused harm. Yes, I was well-intentioned. At the time, I truly thought that their health was at risk and that my words would spur them to take action and save themselves. Underlying my comments, though, is the false narrative that there is an ideal body size that everyone should have and can attain. This belief causes harm. The logical fallacy is put this way by fat activist Aubrey Gordon. Every thin person is healthier than every fat person. Every fat person can become thin if they try hard enough. Fat people simply eat too much, and their greed and gluttony have made them fat. As such, size becomes an indicator of character and willpower, and we use that lens to view everything that fat people do. Where did this anti-fatness come from? Fat people have always existed as a normal human variation. The negative associations with fatness began to happen in the mid-1700s with the transatlantic slave trade. At that time, black bodies became associated with being larger than white bodies in a way to code the black body as other and justify enslaving them. Then, the association of blackness with fatness morphed into the stigmatization of fatness itself. You then see this association with fatness and undesirable people spread. Don't believe me? Here's a quote from the early 1900s from Dr. Elliot Jocelyn, and he was an early diabetes researcher who even now has a very famous diabetes center named after him in Boston. He said, "One only has to visit the Jewish quarter of a large Jewish city to be impressed with the frequency of obesity." And he goes on to hope that as they became more affluent, Jewish people would lose weight in order to fit in with the current styles, i.e. strive towards whiteness. You will see this relationship with thinness and whiteness in other immigrant groups and determine which ones were considered white and which ones would remain an underclass. That line often tracked skin color. Southern European immigrants, those with darker skin, were classified as fatter and therefore less white. These days, anti-fatness is more commonly targeted towards Black women. It is no longer acceptable in polite society to be racist, sexist, or classist. But anti-fat bias has become the dog whistle that allows those same ideas towards poor people and people of color to persist, just by another name. After all, if they weren't so lazy, they wouldn't be fat or poor. But you also see it used to dismiss the ideas of women. How often are criticisms of a woman's work based on her appearance and not on the content of that work? Thus, thinness is not just a matter of health or beauty. It is a cultural structure of power and dominance. Fat people are mistreated and excluded from public life. Everyone else sees and internalizes how fat people are treated. Rather than working to make the world safe for everyone, these people strive for thinness themselves and do what they can to distance themselves from being fat so they do not lose their power. And they believe the lie that their efforts have kept them thin, when actually their body was going to look like that, more or less, no matter what they did. One real-life example. I was at a work conference. In that conference room, those circular tables that we also ate lunch and dinner at were packed in so tightly together that to navigate my way through the room, I had to squeeze by the chairs with lots of excuse me's thrown in. If I were significantly bigger, it would have been, quite frankly, embarrassing to not fit in that space. It was clearly not designed for that type of body. And the next year, I just might stay home. Who is surprised that our capitalist society has found a way to take full advantage of the pursuit of thinness? And who is surprised that weight and health and food choices are framed as issues of personal responsibility rather than ones of structural imbalance? If you are, you haven't been paying attention to, well, anything these days. So I'm going to talk to you about the harm that this anti-fatness causes. First and foremost, let's talk about the physical harm that comes from dieting, or in today's terms, lifestyle changes, or wellness. The science about so much is unclear, but the one thing that is clear is that weight cycling causes harm. Weight cycling is when a person goes on a drastic diet, loses weight, and then gains it back, and often then some. And remember, the weight gain is not a personal failing. It is instead your body doing what it is supposed to do to keep you alive when it thinks you are starving. Studies show that weight cycling has been associated with an increased risk of heart problems in women and an increased risk of death for all genders. And the study that everyone cites concerning weight cycling is about the contestants on The Biggest Loser. Years after the show, their metabolisms were permanently damaged in a way that one doctor with the National Institutes of Health described as frightening and amazing. And yes, there are studies that show harmful health outcomes for fat people. But one huge flaw in those studies is that they do not control for weight stigma and its effect on health outcomes. What does that mean? Can you imagine what it's like to walk into a room and not know if someone's going to call you a cruel name or whisper about you and point? And as a straight-sized person, I was shocked to learn how frequently fat people receive unsolicited comments about their bodies from strangers as they're just going about their day. Can you imagine what it is like to worry when you get on an airplane whether you will be forced to leave because you take up too much space or your seatmate complains? Can you imagine what it's like to hold your breath when the news in your city plays B-rolls of headless fat people when droning on about the obesity crisis, hoping that you do not see your headless, dehumanized body on TV? Can you imagine what it's like to worry when you go to a restaurant whether you will fit in a booth or whether there will be a chair that will support your weight? Have you ever found yourself unable to get back in your car because someone parked a little too close to you in the parking lot, these are not things I think about. So I have more space in my brain to think about other things. And we also know now how these constant stressors affect the body. And these kinds of concerns are daily occurrences for fat people. So now I hope that you are at least somewhat on board with the idea that dieting is harmful. But I'm not going to tell you not to go on a diet. It's your body, and you can make whatever choices you want. And let's be honest, it's easier to be a woman in this world with a smaller body. And having a smaller body can keep you safe. Instead, I'm going to talk about our children and focus on making the world a safe place for them. I will make this statement: no child should ever go on a diet. Why is it bad for children to go on a diet? In addition to the health aspects discussed above, childhood is a time when the body needs fuel to sustain its rapid growth. And that rapid growth is not linear. It comes in fits and spurts and unevenly, and it's going to be chaotic and unpredictable. And adolescence is also that awkward time when girls no longer get told by strangers how cute or pretty they are, and they wonder about that change. The teenage years are a prime time for eating disorders to develop, just waiting for that trigger to bring them out. But perhaps most importantly, putting a child on a diet disconnects them from one of their most basic instincts, hunger, and begins to teach them not to trust their bodies. Their bodies are telling them one thing: I'm hungry. But an outside source is telling them to ignore that signal, to not trust it. Diets and wellness culture outsource self. And it doesn't stop with hunger cues. Children learn to ignore the warning signs their bodies are giving them, and they outsource their autonomy. Girls learn to ignore their own needs and desires until, as adults, they put everyone else's needs ahead of their own and don't even know what their own desires are. Remember, dominance and control. This doesn't mean that children should just be able to eat whatever they want, whenever they want. The idea of intuitive eating is the dynamic interplay between instinct, emotion, and thought. So it's listening to your body and then deciding what you should do about it. Another harm that dieting causes children, and everyone in fact, is based on what we know about the scarcity mindset. If you are deprived of something, your brain's survival instinct will fixate on that thing, and once you have access to it, you binge because your brain does not know when you will have it again. And therefore, restricting your child's sugar intake does not teach them healthy eating habits. Letting them learn to regulate their own hunger cues does. Turning back to how anti-fat bias affects children, there are many subtle ways that children in bigger bodies are discouraged from doing things. Teachers and other adults have biases that make them subconsciously believe that fat children are not as smart as their thinner peers, and they're treated differently. School uniforms don't come in big enough sizes. Sports uniforms and dance costumes are too small. Desks at school are not big enough for children to fit in and learn comfortably. And this all has the effect of keeping children participating in activities and in public life. And these small effects compound over time. So what do you do as the parent of a child in a bigger body? And I will not get into the judgment that exists if you are a mom in a bigger body that also has a child in a bigger body. It's tempting, if your child is bullied for their weight, to help them make better food choices in an attempt to shrink their body and stay safe in the outside world. But rather than starting your child on a dieting path, make your home a safe place to come home to, where your child does not have to constantly think about how she looks. To begin to push back against the idea that girls must shrink themselves and cannot take up space in the world, while acknowledging that it just all sucks. And I get that these ideas are hard. I've been confronting my own biases against fat people to stop that thought that they could get thin if they just tried hard enough, that I could get thin if I just tried hard enough. But I don't say bad things about my body in front of my kids, even though every day I wake up and hope that My body has decided this is the day that it wants to be 20 again. And I challenge you to examine your own reaction when you see a fat person and decide whether those thoughts are based on what you have personally observed about them or whether they are based on assumptions from their size. And if you are straight-sized, do not give diet advice to a fat person. Trust me, they've tried them all and know more than you ever could. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Louise.
So one might think a good reason to be anti-fat is that being fat is unhealthy. While this idea of fatness as a health problem is common in our society, it turns out that its grounding in science is much more dubious than one might expect. I could spend some time here talking about the 2005 CDC study that showed that the mortality risks associated with fatness were much lower than had often been assumed. We could go into Tracy Mann's meta-analysis that discovered that intentional weight loss over a 5-year period often results in initially losing 5 to 10% of your weight, and then the majority of folks end up regaining even more than they initially lost. Together, we could explore the mounting body of evidence that it's not that weight gain causes type 2 diabetes. Rather, the high amounts of insulin in the blood that are a hallmark of developing type 2 diabetes precedes and may cause weight gain. But the truth is, most people who are anti-fat on the grounds of health don't really care about health at all. Instead, more often than not, the conversation about health and fatness functions as a kind of dog whistle. Health becomes a coded term that really just stands in to say how morally superior they are to this person. When you think of a fat person, you think of someone who is lazy, undisciplined, stupid, and straight up disgusting. These are the stereotypes of fat folks. When you express concern for their health, not only are you implying that you in fact have the health that these people lack, hello ableism, but that you are better than them because you are not lazy, undisciplined, stupid, and straight up disgusting. Megan shared with us the history of how fatness became demonized in our society, and it is grounded in racism. When describing a person of color as unhealthy, the speaker is probably actually saying that they are fat, which is another way to condemn them on the grounds of race. Here, health functions as a stand-in for so many other kinds of bigotry, all the while masquerading as this hyper-rational fixation on people's ability to escape their own mortality. No one is morally superior to me because they have a smaller body. Your exercise routine and the things you do to manipulate your body to maintain a particular size does not make you morally better than me. No one can tell how much I move my body by my body size. No one can tell if I am healthy or not based on the size of my body. All anyone can tell is that I have a big body. Body size is not an indicator of health, and fatness is not an indicator of moral inferiority. And if your response to this is, well, I never intended to say that I was better than anybody else, I would like to remind you that impact is greater than intent. And if something I have said here sparks some inner resistance, I invite you to seize that opportunity for some genuine reflection. The last time I was preaching at this podium, I mentioned that I prefer to be called Dr. Louise. One of the reasons this is my preferred name is because it directly challenges the stereotypes people harbor against me. Lazy, undisciplined, stupid, disgusting people usually don't have doctorates. And this is exactly why some folks struggle to call me Dr. Louise. I don't look like the kind of person who should have been able to achieve a doctorate. Combine that with the fact that my full cheeks make the world perceive me as younger than I actually am, and people squirm when they call me by my name. I experience fatphobia virtually every time I step out of my house. Sometimes it's small things like dirty looks or judgmental comments. Sometimes it's big things like not having a place to sit without harming my body or being denied necessary medical care. Oftentimes, I'm forced to act awkwardly in social settings because there is, at most, one spot in the whole restaurant that might be able to hold my body without bruises, scratching, and so much pain that I wouldn't be able to enjoy the meal anyways. Half the time, a thinner person takes that spot without even noticing that it comes at a cost to me. And I am just a super fat. For many fatter folks than they don't even have the option to sit in most restaurants. I have a genetic mutation that puts me at exponentially greater risk for breast cancer compared to the general population. One option for this issue is a double mastectomy. However, because of my body size, I am unlikely to find a provider that would be willing to do the surgery, despite the fact that there is no evidence that it is any riskier for a fat person than for a straight-sized person. Now for me, this isn't a massive deal because I have other options. However, you can imagine for our trans brothers and sisters, surgery like this might make the difference between the desire to live and giving up. Fat trans folks are often denied life-saving surgery simply on the grounds of their body size. This is permitted within the medical system, a system which refuses to train doctors and surgeons on fat bodies. Most programs in which you can donate your body to science refuse to accept bodies over 200 pounds. The medical system is designed to keep fat folks from receiving the care that they deserve, which all makes sense when you notice that anti-fatness is grounded in racism, which is right next door to eugenics. So, what can we do about all of this? Well, first of all, I'd invite you to start with yourself. Ditch the internal monologue that you use to criticize the shape of your own body. You are beautiful, and you do not need to police your own body. Second, stop commenting on other people's bodies. Whether you believe it's a compliment or criticism, just don't say it. You're very likely to say something that is either upholding problematic beauty standards within our society or to long-term make someone feel bad for how their body is or will change. Instead, find other things to talk about. Personality, ambitions, hopes, dreams. We are all so much more interesting than our meat sacks. Third, educate yourself. There is a wonderful collection of approachable works created by fat folks who can help you deepen your understanding of this very real way that oppression plays out in our society. We've provided you all with a list of resources, including podcasts, books, and social media accounts you can use to become an ally to fat folks. And for anyone who's interested in exploring this here in our community, myself and Kelly Faust will be starting a reading group to explore some of these important resources. If you'd like to join us on that journey, talk to me after the sermon. Thank you.